And record. Okay, thank you so much. So just for the sake of the recording, paraprofessional organizations. Thank you so much, JP. Okay.
Sure, you're very welcome. Okay, so yeah, a little bit of background for myself. I am a Cal Poly Pomona graduate. I graduated in 2002. I got my degree in materials engineering, officially materials. I'm one of the very few. There still is an active and very large minor for materials engineering, and they've recently started up a master's degree in materials engineering also within the College of Chemical and Materials Engineering. But I officially hold an undergraduate degree in materials engineering from Cal Poly Pomona. Glad to have that. In my professional career, while I was at Cal Poly and before, actually, I had many internships. I worked at 3S Navigation. I did some software, electrical integration, software development, hardware build out, production. It was a relatively small company, about 15 people at its peak, but then it ultimately dissolved. And then I was in school full time, so I got internships at Radiant Technology, which made conveyorized furnaces. I did a lot of technical writing for them. Also, hydrogen burner technology, which was an early fuel cell reformer company, if you will. So, back in the dot-com boom, there was a lot of interest in renewable energy, and there still is today, but more then. And in that renewable energy discussion, they had fuel cells, which take hydrogen gas and convert that into electricity. But they needed then that hydrogen gas. And the infrastructure within the country doesn't really support that very well. We have natural gas. And so we were making reformers, basically refrigerator-sized devices you could have in your house or in your business that would convert the natural gas into hydrogen gas, so you could then convert that to electricity and have your own power plant at your house. Very, very interesting stuff. Chemistry, process engineering, hands-on tests, a lot of great stuff. And then I also worked at Multiquip, which is a technical distribution company for construction equipment. But I also wanted to point out that I got all of these effectively through my relationship with Cal Poly. And all of those eventually turned into year-round opportunities for me. So even though I was working primarily over the summer, they all retained me through the course of the year, which was fantastic. That of course kept helping pay the bills and other things. And again, just increasing that professional knowledge as I developed my educational background going to school. Once I graduated, I started work at Northrop Grumman. That would have been about 2003. Remember, that was only a couple of years after 9/11, and a lot of the industries were impacted. And so opportunities were not quite as evolved as I'm sure they will be today for those of you who are graduating now. And I encourage you to, that there will be opportunities for jobs. I mean, obviously, Amazon is still doing fantastic. But a lot of other companies may need somebody to come in and perform for them for a period of time. Is that we all have to be flexible in terms of that professional development and what we're doing. And just because we're struggling today doesn't mean we will be tomorrow. And I had to take an interim job doing some temp work actually for a while until I landed my career at Northrop Grumman. I started out as a fluid systems integration assembly and test engineer, which is kind of somewhere between manufacturing engineering and test engineering and planning and writing and producing hardware. I worked on a large scale laser. This was actually the size of a 747, and it actually was installed in a live 747 and actually demonstrated shooting down ballistic missiles. We would fly off the coast of California, they would shoot a missile from Hawaii, and then we would shoot it out of the sky. It was a little ahead of its time. Actually, it was probably a lot ahead of its time. There were a lot of technical issues, and ultimately the program was canceled by the Department of Defense. But at the time of its flight, it was the most expensive airplane ever. Pretty exciting. The next most expensive would have been Air Force One. But we beat them out due to the complexity of the aircraft to accomplish that mission. So very, very interesting stuff. I did a lot of optomechanical work. I went on to become a section manager, meaning I actually ran the lab, the technicians and the equipment and the facilities and the capital and everything that went along with it. And then I moved over to do similar kind of work for a structural test organization before landing on my current job, which is an IPT or integrated product team lead for a program we call Whirl. And what that really is just a large scale electromechanical device, which we are qualifying. So it's a clean sheet designed by the company. It's a brand new thing that we're building. And I'm responsible for making sure that it passes all of what we call qualification tests. That would be things like environmental test, vibration, acoustics, thermal, and also the functionality of what it is that we're developing. So it's been really, really great. The last few years of my career have been fantastic. I've had a great team of people. And I would just say that people are really what make a lot of what work is fun, and then also the content. And we'll talk a little bit about that as part of this discussion we have today. So I am currently a senior staff test engineer for aeronautics systems within Northrop Grumman. And I've had about a 16-year career there at the company. So I think the other thing we were going to say, Alexis, was that if anybody has any questions along the way, feed those into the chat. And Alexis will send those my way and or alert me. And we can certainly interrupt the conversation for discussion if anyone has any questions.
Yes, 100%. Thanks so much for saying that, JP. So yeah, any kinds of questions that you have, please feel free to put them in the chat. I always recommend, listing your preferred name, maybe your major and year, and then the concern you have, so I can introduce you appropriately.
Great, thanks, Alexis. Mm-hmm. So here's a little overview. We're going to be talking about professional organizations today, and what do they do, why you should join, and a little bit of a call to action. And let's dive right into it. So what are professional examples, or what are professional organizations, excuse me. Here are a few examples that I dug off the internet. For all you aeronautical and or aerospace engineers, there's AIAA. And of course, this is not meant to cover them all, just to provide you a context in terms of which I'm speaking to today. Mechanical engineering has ASME, chemical engineering has AICHE, and if you go to the next slide, there's a laundry list of a bunch of others that are out there. Again, not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination, but we have ASM, or American Society of Materials International, SAE, SME, MRS. I also point out that there are parallel organizations like the Society of Women's Engineers, the Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers, SHPE, that even within your identity as a person, there are organizations that can help you connect in ways that are beyond just maybe the technical discipline. But one of the aspects of what we're going to talk about today is networking, and sometimes that can mean going beyond just your very specific technical discipline, but learning what other industries, what other interconnectedness there is from engineering organizations out in the real world. So again, non-exhaustive, just trying to give you a sense of what kinds of things we're going to be talking about today in context to the discussion. Okay, so what are professional organizations? They are, international. Almost all of them are going to be international in nature. They are a collection of professionals that are interested in the betterment of their field of study, and it's not just the study, but also the practice of that field of study. So it's about what the actual applications are, what are the actual needs, and they have, for context for us, they have both national and local chapters. And those local chapters are that opportunity or your place to connect with those professionals. Looks like we might have a question. Oh, I think you're muted, Alexis.
So Elijah asked, were you part of any organizations while you were at Cal Poly Pomona?
Yeah, and actually, I think that's almost the next statement I was going to make. Good question. Student organizational chapters are prevalent for many of these professional organizations, And so I would definitely encourage you to join those or create your own, which is kind of what I did. So I mentioned I was a materials engineering graduate, and the materials engineering program had only been active for about 2 years. And at that time, there weren't active student organizations in materials engineering. And there was AICHE, but that was obviously chemical engineering. And so I started the Materials Engineering Club, or MTech, and started the student chapters for ASM International and MRS at the college. So those were the ones I was active in at Cal Poly: AICHE, ASM International, SAMPE, which is the Society for the Advancement of Materials and Process Engineering, and then the Materials Research Society, MRS. And then I also registered for SME, Society of Manufacturing Engineering, SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, and I did also IEEE as well. So, one of the things I'm going to talk about is do not hold back. The cost and of being involved or being connected is almost free for students. I think when I first started, almost all of them were free or $10 for students to join. And so, I would say cast a wider net in terms of trying to develop your interest level in the professions that are out there. But again, that we'll go into a little more of that. So,
Thank you so much, Tracy.
Sure, yeah. And there are also different levels of involvement that you can be involved in these professional organizations. Obviously, I've talked about the local chapters that you can engage with in professionals, but sometimes there are also opportunities at the national level. You might be able to get an internship, say, at their location, or you could be online an editor for articles, or you could put together publications for them. There are things beyond even just being involved at your local level or in your student chapter that might give you exposure or opportunities beyond just what's there in the what's here in the LA Basin, if you will. I also like to point out that these are volunteer-run organizations. Typically at the home location, there will be a profession. There are professionals who are sitting there, creating the basic magazine and running the organization and divvying up the dues that are paid to those organizations between the chapters and such. But largely the rest of the chapters and others, it's all volunteer run. And so in that regard, just be mindful that when you go and engage with your local chapter or your regional membership, that, pay attention to who's involved and get to know them a little, because that will have a big influence on how much you'll get out of it. Because if somebody's really they're in it for their own reasons and they're not really interested in helping students, then you may not get as much out of that. And so there's kind of that balance of assessing what the professional organization is doing in your local area and also what your involvement is. So sometimes there can be, like in my case, there wasn't a particularly strong student membership at ASM International in the LA region. But once I joined, I said, well, I want to create a student chair for the chapter. And they said, sure. And then they said, and you can be the student chair. So I was holding the role while still a student at Cal Poly to help increase student membership and going to monthly council meetings, if you will, and going then to the recurring meetings that where more of the professionals would come in and kind of help run that volunteer organization. And I still, not significantly, but I still participate today when they have student paper competitions. I'll go and participate in those ones to make sure that there are folks who can interrogate the students as they're presenting their papers. Again, just to try to increase their interaction with professionals out in the industry. So yeah, so I think that's all I wanted to talk about there. Okay, and what do they do? So if you click, this is kind of click animated, so just click in the screen there, I think. Yeah. Oh, it was supposed to be paragraph by paragraph. That's fine. So conferences, are a big part of, I think, what one of the aspects you can get out of these opportunities. So again, not only could you, so sometimes you'll have to pay for it for yourself. Luckily, a number of them end up kind of in the LA area or in the San Francisco area. But there, again, if you go with the student chapters or you're involved at the professional level, there can be support. So I signed up to present a paper at, say, the MRS invention, and they allowed me to, it's okay. They allowed me to, they actually paid for my airfare to the conference, my participation in the conference, my hotel, and everything while I was there, which was a great opportunity. So, and also realize that these conferences are not trade shows. I mean, there is some element of trade show. And what I mean trade show is, trade shows are really about selling stuff and this is what I can sell you and this is what I'm interested in buying. It has a very different feel. And we have the Aero Def Con, the Aerospace Defense Convention. They also refer to them as conventions, are different than technical conferences. So at conferences, you'll find more technical papers, short course opportunities, obviously networking events to get a hold of folks. They may almost always have a job fair as well, poster presentations and other things like that. So a little more technical in its development. And I think that it's important to know that that's a difference because usually those kinds of conferences and the papers that are being presented there are really the cutting edge, meaning in some cases, you won't read about a particular development in a literature because the person doing the research doesn't want to let the cat out of the bag. And it's almost a trade secret. And so but they're still motivated either by their academic institution or their company to present that information in some form or another. And that can sometimes be your only window into what could be that particular idea. So one would, for me, would be there are laser crystal materials that are in development for creating high power lasers. And at the time, there was papers being presented on basically ceramic-based crystals as opposed to slow growth, uniform, boule-type crystals. And the difference could be, geometry can be almost instantaneous. The quality can be also almost better than what you can get out of a grown crystal. And that wasn't something that was readily available in standard literature or in magazines. That's something you really have to go to a trade show to understand. So that cutting edge element is important because, your professional development and what you're interested in might be piqued by something you pick up at one of those technical conferences. So, and again, I'll touch a little bit on that a little bit later. Like I mentioned earlier, also continued education in terms of short courses. And again, maybe very specific trade type development, if you're really interested in RF engineering or, renewed energy applications and chemical engineering, you might be able to find short courses that are specific to that. And again, what the next best thing is that you're going to that course and there's 10 people in the room. We'll get a card from everyone in the room because all those 10 people are equally as interested in studying that particular topic as you are. And it's an opportunity to get close to somebody who may already be involved or breaking into the development of whatever that technology is. And maybe they've got an internship, right? So an opportunity to connect with somebody to do something that you're really specifically interested in. And of course, they're interested in hiring an intern who's really interested in doing that, and you've already got your foot in the door. So just a great networking opportunity, even at short courses. And I did that when I was at, I went to, I forget which conference it was, but I ended up getting admitted for free into a short course on MEMS, micro electromechanical systems, which is basically creating mechanical structures into a semiconductor. And this is what is the basis of accelerometers in your phone today. So when it tells you like which direction you're heading or what the vibration of your phone is or how you play a video game using your phone, the accelerometers that are used in your phone are a MEMS device. And they were just coming to fruition, what is probably 15, 20 years ago, and starting to look at what can we do, or can we can we machine an inductive RF coil into the surface of a chip that then provides RF functionality that you can't achieve in other ways. And so what I learned from that also was that there was a couple of organizations that work a lot on that in the Department of Defense. And one of them is at the Naval Research Center in Point Mugu. And they have a biomimetics lab and study also these MEMS devices and kind of correlating the two. So again, just really interesting technical discussion and potential job opportunities that could have come to fruition had I looked harder at it. So I also mentioned the job opportunities and job fairs that can be available at these conferences, or sometimes even the local chapters will have meetings for that as well. And I also mentioned the community boards. Right. So, of course, there's the local meetings and the networking opportunities that you have at those locations. And one of the things I was pointing out is that in almost all cases, the professional organizations will list the local chapter, and then you can click on the local chapter, and it may even show the names and jobs of the people who are the chapter representatives for, say, ASM International or SPIE or AIAA. And then that's a way to get names to reach out, connect, contact, and learn more about what that organization has to offer. And then I also point out latest news and publications. So on the left-hand side, you see there's the AIAA monthly publication. It's a magazine. You can get it both physically and now digitally. A lot of them are all going digital. I still feel like the paper copy helps me learn and read and better understand. And again, as a student, they'll usually give that to you for free, as opposed to having to pay the $150. So for me to get that, I have to pay $150 to be a member in order to get that publication. But again, it's a parallel industry for me, so super helpful. And then to the right of it, there is the ASM handbook. I just found a copy of an example. They have a library of handbooks, but they'll give those to students for I think 90% off their retail price. And in some cases, the chapter may even, at the time when we would do our competitions locally, we would actually give books to students as part of winning an award for participation, because they're trying to cement themselves in your minds as a go-to resource for those professional organizations and develop that exposure and knowledge for themselves for the future. So again, great opportunities there. Okay, next. All right, we're about halfway through. Okay, so obviously we're hitting the our tagline for today's presentation. Why should you join interacting with professionals and learning the lingo? So understanding the actual language of the actual application is sometimes different than what you're studying in your books. Like you study thermodynamic processes, but then are we talking about heat exchangers? Okay, but are we talking about a plate heat exchanger, or a coil heat exchanger, or a bonded, brazed coil heat exchanger? Well, we don't necessarily cover all that in our classes. So now's your opportunity to kind of learn that there are these different types of heat exchangers. In fact, I was just having a discussion about a facility we're trying to add where the heat exchanger is plumbed wrong, because it's supposed to, we're supposed to counterflow the flow through the heat exchanger on a plate stack, and they messed up and did it as co-flow. So your heat exchange rate isn't as efficient in that application. But, so I know that off the top of my head because I've had all this professional exposure. But if you don't have that exposure in terms of the actual application and talk to people about practical uses, that may kind of float over your head in that conversation. So now's your chance to get out and interact with people and learn, and you can stop and ask, wait, well, what is a plate heat exchanger? And then they can help explain to you what that is specifically. Go ahead, Alexis. Technical education short courses. So even as a student, so like I said, even as a student, you can a lot of times obtain access to these technical presentations at the conferences, or even at your local chapter level. Like they may offer involvement in a course, or you could petition to the council or the chapter and say, hey, can you go fund me within the chapter 50% of what I need because I only have $200 this month and it costs $1,000, then again, there might be a real opportunity for you there. Next. Okay, so business mindset, selling products and services. So as you read these trade magazines for the professional organizations, they're still going to have advertisements embedded within. And seeing and understanding what those advertisements are a function of our industry. And so it gives you an exposure to what are new applications, what are things you could be using. You go visit the website, you kind of learn what the website is. I mean, the reality is marketing is part of engineering. And so by having that exposure, again, looking at these magazines and seeing things, you learn how to sell a product or know the particular aspects of a product that are important. You know, what do we care about as technical professionals, as opposed to what do you see in popular mechanics, which is a very different audience for that. So it kind of helps improve that business mindset of your approach to your trade as an engineer. Next. Predicting success. So I think some of these things are also important, meaning that the professional organizations that are out there are then giving back to schools or encouraging student involvement or doing other things like that. And or you see a large participation from highly successful individuals, then that gives you some indication of like, and I mean, you know, it's probably a poor example, but, you know, everyone drove up in nice cars as opposed to nobody came to this meeting, right? Well, you can, you know, kind of gauge the professional success of the people who are participating, how they're participating, how much that organization is giving back to, you know, schools, or, you know, did IEEE have a COVID-19, you know, donation or something like that, is a litmus, is a health check of the success of that particular professional organization in or your particular professional career. And we'll touch on that again in a bit. Next. So I think part of this is, you know, it's more than just a line on a resume. I mean, obviously being involved in a professional organization is something you can list in your resume, but like I kind of said, you get out what you put in. Is there's a lot more to get out of it than just a line in your resume. Next. Okay, so why join now? So here in Los Angeles, we're definitely lucky to have a lot of organizations available. Actually, that's one of the reasons why I chose Cal Poly Pomona over Cal Poly SLO. Although SLO has industry, but LA has a lot of industry. Is that it gets you, you know, how to know the board. You have the opportunity to present at conferences. You could potentially get funding. I had I had applied to basically I forgot what it was really called, but it was an opportunity to build a presentation package as a poster presentation for the National Science Foundation, was co-funding with the Materials Research Society. And that's when I went up to San Francisco. And I mean, just being in San Francisco for 3 days was, you know, a lot by itself. And the only thing I had to produce was a poster, you know, so I think I had to pay for the poster. I ended up paying for the poster out of my own pocket because all the budget, they had given me $2,000. I had spent that $2,000 on the equipment and the materials I needed to run the tests. And then the cool thing was I got to keep all that equipment. You know, like I bought an analog data tester and a digital DMM and some solar cells and a bunch of other stuff. But I got to keep all that when I was done, which was fun. But there is that, you know, again, just that opportunity here in the LA basin that there are a lot of active chapters. There's a lot of industry. I mean, obviously, SpaceX staying in South Bay is huge for us as an aerospace industry. That's super fantastic. So a lot of opportunities here. Next. So the professional organizations offer usually steep discounts to participate, and you're getting that literature, you're getting the invites to those chapter meetings. You can go out and engage with the professionals who are out in the world actively working in jobs in your field, and you get to learn about what those are. Next. So I kind of mentioned it before, what ones were I involved in? As a student, I was really involved in the ones in materials and chemical engineering. But as I mentioned, also I cast a wider net and was actually signed up to many other professional organizations. And now is that time to get that exposure, increase that knowledge base, learn how to understand and talk about those practical applications in the language that those professionals use. Next. You're definitely gaining that exposure to those individuals in your industry and also in parallel industries, meaning as a materials engineer, I studied corrosion and material properties. But how does that, one of the interesting things that I learned as a professional was that actually the plating of metals is basically the inverse of corrosion. And everything that I learned in my corrosion class completely applied to this black chrome plating we were trying to apply as an absorptive device for our high energy laser, and really helped me understand and execute that particular job I had as a professional as a function of my education. And I learned that on my own, and I stress it when I talk to people taking the corrosion class today, that sometimes we learn of different aspects to our education relative to that. But then, so getting that exposure to people even in parallel industries, yeah, and I mentioned here also piping. So at ASM International, we had an active participant who was a major player at one of the local distribution centers for piping materials. And so learned a lot about, from him, the pipe diameter versus tube diameter versus wall thickness versus schedule, and a lot of the aspects relative to that. And then I leveraged his knowledge when I became a professional to help provide supplies to some of the jobs that I was doing, because I knew he had inventory of stainless steel pipe that I could get in a day. That even provided me a leg up once I got my real job. Next.
So real quick, we have a question, another one
from
Elijah. He mentions, I feel like participating in clubs always rivals my academic performance. I'm often hesitant to take time away from studying. How did you navigate that, get past that?
Yes, clearly. And it is a balance, right? I think, there certainly were times where my involvement in my professional activities was less based on my class schedule. But as with anything, it takes time. And sometimes it's also things like, what kind of senior class did you take, or are you involved in, so what did we do? I did do a quarter or two with the solar car. I did a couple of quarters working on the solar car to help get that going, because the solar cells and renewable energy, and that was of interest to me. But I wasn't able to stick with it, and actually the team didn't make a car and compete. I know what it was. Actually, it wasn't the solar car, it was the solar boat. We did compete, but I didn't go to the competition. I just helped make sure that we made the spreadsheet on how to work the panel and the layout to the cells that we had, and develop the recipe for soldering the cells, and help build the panel layouts. But then I had to give that up because I had other priorities, job, profession, other things. And that will always be a challenge. I mean, even today, my involvement in professional organizations is challenged by the level of work that I have, or responsibility that I have. And so I think it's, take what you can, give what you can, and provide that balance for yourself as you go through. So sometimes maybe it's not as involved at the student organization level and the competitions they're involved in, but taking more time to go to the professional meetings and be involved at the chapter level. But everyone has to kind of figure that out for themselves. Take less classes. But then obviously you're going to graduate later. But no, that may not be the best choice. But take a summer course, and take that double E course that's offered every quarter during the summer. Even though you like to take the summer off, spend more time in the professional chapter organization stuff. And obviously the student stuff is slow for the summer. Balance it out a little bit longer is obviously a choice. But yeah, good question.
Thank you so much, JP.
Yeah. So early exposure and networking, and you can click to the next line, Alexis, already. I think I've covered a lot of that. So I think the important part here is what kind of jobs are out there. it's, know your industry as a professional. And you can go ahead and click the next. I think there's two more here. Um, this can improve your discussion at your interview. So I think one of the things is, can you click one more time? I think I put it on here as well. Maybe that's the last line on here. No, it is here. Yeah. So, there's this, kind of insight into the future. I kind of mentioned too is, if you talk to professionals that have jobs in your discipline today, then you kind of know and learn and understand what is in that job, and you get to talk to that industry and learn what they're doing as a professional. And again, by learning the lingo and being able to talk about some of those specific industry terms, like I went to an interview for the insurance industry, if you will. Farmers has a global insurance organization, and they also provide development of safety standards that are used across the industry. So you'll actually see like their stamp on fire extinguishers and other things like that. And I was not as prepared for that interview technically as I would have liked to have been, because I had never talked to anyone about insurance. So, but by having somebody who, and even today you could talk to them about what their job is, or that they know people who might know about that job, that you can try to learn more about what that profession is before you walk in the door to have the interview. And then when they start asking you questions, you're already giving them responses that are relevant to what they're looking forward to hear. If they're saying, do you know how to, control a PID loop? And you can say, yeah, I took a course on that one time. But if you know that in their industry they use PID loops, and you can say, well, yeah, it's a proportional integral derivative, formations for tuning, and you adjust the parameters based on what you need for a process flow. Like, then you're already speaking language. Then they understand that you understand that what they're looking for in terms of the job that they're looking for. And then even within the job title, like sometimes the job title is hard to tell what they're really asking for and talking about. Well, reach out to them and say, can you tell me a little bit more about what that job title means than mechanical engineer, so that I can prepare for the interview? And in some cases they'll say, well, yeah, we're looking for somebody who can help, design the structure for our new furnace, or we're looking for somebody to design the cooling system for the UV bulb inside our furnace, or we're looking for somebody to build this test stand. Well, then at least if you know a little bit more about what that is, then you can go try to study up on what aspects might be relevant to their interest in hiring, and then that puts you in a better position to speak at that interview and potentially land that job if that's what you're looking for. So, and then I kind of also point out getting an internship. Durai Swami was at the AIC, heavily involved in AICHE, and he was like, hey, Mr. Kuntz, do you want to come work for HBT this summer? And I'm like, heck yeah. So even that worked out to a full-time summer internship, and then continued through the year while I was still in school, and it was great. That was a fantastic opportunity. And then the other thing that's great about that is first of all, it's probably close. Second of all, it's supported. Mr. Durai, was my mentor while I was there at the company, and because we already had that personal connection. And so, he's already more interested in helping me than just some intern that we hired for the summer. So sometimes those kinds of opportunities can even be better in terms of their development because of how they started. Okay, so I think we got one more.
Yeah. So real quick, we have a couple questions. So Marvin Sevilla, Computer Science, Class of 2024, asked, how enriching was your interning experience towards your classroom knowledge? And so they also said, it's sensible that balancing in-school and out-of-school involvement must be sort of delicately navigated so that you achieve the most. But would you say that internships are more important or just as important as a college education?
I guess at the end of the day, I felt that my internships were equally important to my development as a student as my education was. And so I would say you need to go to an internship as much as you need to go to class. Because, knowing and learning and understanding what you're going to be doing in the real world is important. And I think sometimes it's very easy to get tunnel vision when you're at school to only focus on the courses at hand. But if you don't really understand how those are applied in the real world, and I'm about ready to start talking about that, is you don't know how and where you want to apply that and what kinds of jobs you want to be doing. And then it's also just kind of, you get that early sense of how do you take what you've learned in school and apply it in the real world, and what are the methodologies in which you do that. So do you use an Excel? Today we're locked in a lot of Google. I'm using a Chromebook today, but at work it's all PC oriented still. And some industries are going to be just PCs. And so maybe you're like, well, maybe I should go buy a crappy old PC for $100 and at least learn how it works so I know how to interact with it, because that's what everybody's using. And for me, it's the opposite. My daughter's going to school and they all have Chromebooks, and I need to learn how to use that so I can be effective at communicating using that alternate technology, if you will. So I think that exposure to the industry is equally important as your education is. Was that both questions, Alexis?
Yes. So yeah, I would say so. About how enriching was your internship experience to your classroom knowledge. I think from what you've discussed, it's very applicable. So it wasn't just concepts that you were learning, but suddenly you knew how to apply them, you know what it meant to industry and all of that.
Yeah, and I think also that the variety I was able to get in terms of the internship. So I also made a little bit of a point to kind of stop an internship and start a new one. So even though they kept me on year round, I wouldn't necessarily follow that summer to summer, and to give myself exposure to a different type of industry or different type of activity. Also kind of helped me understand, again, differences in terms of application. But no, those experiences were tremendously beneficial to my professional career once I landed my real job, if you will, because I developed skills in tools. Now, granted, they weren't all fantastic. One of them was just learning how to make drawings in Microsoft Word. I got really good at it, and because I was doing a bunch of technical writing, and that really helped me be able to convey messages within, and that was equally applicable to PowerPoint or Microsoft Word or Excel. Also, using Excel spreadsheets to convey data in useful ways, learning how to use a pivot table within Excel to convey data in useful ways quickly. In some cases, you're almost better off because you're able to take the time to learn some of those advanced features within the tools that are available better than even the professionals that use them on a regular basis today, because they fell into them late in their life and they're just not as adept at learning those extra features. I'm still amazed today that we have interns coming in that know far better how to constrain a mechanical model and use like a script to say, well, if I want to adjust the wall thickness, I want you to constrain these aspects to the model and grow the thickness only internally, not externally, because I have an external dimension. Most of the designers don't in the real world today, if you will, don't know how to use that feature because it wasn't the feature that was even available. And so it's almost mind-blowing in terms of what can be achieved based on this, connection between, say, CAD and or Excel, or CAD and MATLAB. I mentored a student who took MATLAB scripts and used them to create stress fields in a mechanical model based on limitations of the profile. I mean, so we could distribute load. Like we're trying to take load and put it on a wing and distribute it out. Well, how do you do that without trying to calculate it out all individually? And the last guy who did it was 10 years ago, and he did it all using some, COBOL script, that nobody even programs in anymore. And so we had to figure out a new way to do that. And nobody else was prepared to do that except for this college, new hire. And so because he had given himself the opportunity of doing both, he was a mechanical engineer, but he had worked in these, applications within MATLAB and kind of understanding the interface between mathematic systems and CAD systems, he was able to come up with a solution space that honestly we should have been paying a level 4 or 5 engineer to be doing, and he's doing it as a level 1, 2 engineer. So I mean that clearly helped his career, and he was able to, they moved him up I think almost to a level 3 engineer almost right away because of what he brought to the table in terms of technical aptitude. So Yep.
Thank you so much. And one more, so Armando, third year mechanical engineering student. So he wanted to know if you had any more advice about leveraging your network to prepare for the workforce. So you've talked about mentorship, you've talked about faculty who you had strong relationships with. So for students now, do you have any recommendations for what that leveraging could look like as they're preparing to be professionals?
Yeah, so I think let's go to the next slide, because I almost feel like I am talking to that in this slide. So let's talk to that. So here's an important aspect. So choosing your occupation, not just your profession. So one of the things that's important, I think, in terms of getting this exposure through professional organizations, reading the magazines and the literature, studying the case histories, case studies that are presented, looking at some of those practical applications. You can go into the next couple of bullets, Alexis. Is, like I said, it's not just the profession, mechanical engineering. It's mechanical engineer as a airframe designer, or mechanical engineer as a mechanical test designer, or mechanical engineering as a ground support equipment designer, are all very different aspects to the same field, right? That profession has very different occupations in its application. So, I definitely encourage having those conversations with the professionals about what are their day-to-day activities like, so that you can understand, well, that's a job that I want to do, or that's not a job I want to do. And that might have real implication if you're, say, an introvert versus an extrovert. Do you have to go out and talk to people all the time as a sales engineer? Well, maybe you don't want that kind of a job, right? Or like I mentioned here, analysis versus design. Are you sitting in in front of a computer, buried, waist deep in data, and trying to find, intricate anomalies and figuring out, ways to analyze the data and present it again in useful ways, as I mentioned before? Or are you abstractly trying to design something that's never been done before? Or are you concretely designing something that has been done before, but it was designed by your competitor, and now you're trying to design the same product today with new parameters? There's new materials, there's faster equipment, there's 3D modeling and 3D printing, if you will. But we're going to try to attack this problem using additive manufacturing rather than subtractive manufacturing, and that could be an entirely different solution. Well, is the company you're going to go to apply to working in additive manufacturing? How far are they along in that process? Are you going to go find a small company that's really focused in additive manufacturing, because the big companies are too far along in building big, complicated things that don't have that process just yet? Try to understand what that means. I mean, even at Northrop today, I'm sometimes surprised at how we approach additive manufacturing in terms of implementation strategy, because I think there are real applications. I'm a materials engineer by education, but I don't see us doing it right. And so if somebody was really interested in additive manufacturing, I'm like, well, there are like 2 people that are doing that. And if you could get into that group, maybe, but only in as much as we're interested in spending R&D dollars on it. For us, it's really about the application. Like, could you additive manufacturing a whole wing for the a Global Hawk airplane? No, we're not there yet. But if you were able to figure that out and present that as an idea, well, then maybe somebody would say, yeah, that could work for us, and we're interested in doing that. But it's more likely that some composite composite company that's trying to figure out how to do additive manufacturing composite materials and figure out how to use fiber tow machines in some new way, you're better off working for that technical R&D development type company than you are in an established company, if that's what you're really interested in. So again, I think it's talking to people who are doing their jobs, i.e. me or other professionals that are out there, to help you understand that better. Next, I think there's a couple more statements. Yeah, so like I said, choosing a job where you will be most successful for yourself, right? So again, if you know and understand more about what the jobs are and what you do day to day, then you're going to be a lot more successful. And the other thing too is, if you already know what those jobs are and you know you're going to be interested in them and you're excited about it, then that is the largest step up you can give yourself in terms of your career. Because what you really want is, you want your job to be fun every day. You don't want to walk in and be like, oh man, do I have to look at data again? Man, I wish I were designing something over there. And you ended up in the company in a job where you don't want to be. and you're biding your time for a couple of years to get to that other job because you got your foot in the door, like you want to work at Northrop and I want to be designing stuff, but I just want to get in the door. And that might be a strategy as well. But if you could line yourself up where you're doing a job that you're already excited about, then when you come in and knock their socks off, then that immediately starts getting you into that upward momentum in terms of that career development, going on to the next best job, getting more responsibility, authority, and oversight. Or if you're working in, like I said, a smaller team environment and you're doing something that you're passionate about and work doesn't feel like work anymore. You're going in and you're excited and you're working with people who share the same passion as you do, and you're doing something that you feel like makes a difference or something you want to be doing, then those will far outweigh your technical aptitude, your education in terms of your career in how that develops over time. You'll be far more successful if you're doing something you like and that you enjoy. And if you go talk to professionals today, you'll figure that out before you even hit the interview. And then when you hit the interview, you'll be like, I know this job, I'm excited about it, I know how to talk about it, and let me tell you everything I know about it. And then they're going to be like, well, this guy's hands down the winner. Let's bring them on board. We think they're going to be successful at this job. It's not just about technical ability. It's also about being successful. Do we like, this person's attitude, and are they going to be a team player? And do they share a passion about what is this job and what we're doing are equally as important to, I studied RF engineering in college. Okay. Well, what did you do with your spare time? Well, yeah, I like to work on radios, as opposed to, I was in the IEEE and I did a paper and I worked at a conference and I talked to these other professionals that were in this job, and I know exactly what your company builds, and I saw it in this magazine, and here's the article I read, and this is everything I know about it, right? Who's going to win that selection process in terms of down select when you go to hire somebody? I think those are really important aspects that I see as discriminators for new hires coming in to the job. And then it's also about networking. If you know somebody who knows somebody, then that I will almost always rely on, I talk to this person and they're staking their professional reputation on, here's a name I recommend that we look at to hire into our company. That networking is also a good place to start. So if you can interact with somebody at your local chapter who knows the profession and is trying to hire somebody, or knows somebody who's trying to hire somebody, that again is, companies don't always do the best job of publishing their needs to the world, and digging that up is difficult. So networking is your next best friend to, LinkedIn and Indeed and Monster.com. Okay, so did I quite answer that other question, Alexis?
Okay, so Armando, if you had any other clarification questions to ask, I know you have to get to class if you wanted to unmute or anything.
All right, almost perfect timing.
Yeah, all right. So thank you so much, JP. I found it so helpful, and I hope you all liked hearing JP's really tremendous experience. I loved getting to know your story a few months ago when we met, because I just love how at every opportunity you made your own opportunities. And yes, it was tight. Thank you, Elijah. And so, yeah, I think that it's just incredible. And I think especially in a time like this where it feels like there are fewer opportunities, knowing how important networking is, knowing, with clarity what you want to do, that's really important. And so thank you so much for sharing your insight. And obviously for you did multiple internships, multiple opportunities. You were very involved when you were a student, but you've been at Northrop Grumman ever since, right? So I feel like it really clarified for you what you wanted to do, and you've been incredibly loyal to, Northrop Grumman. And so, yeah, so just, if I can advise you of anything, I mean, there are so many good things to take out of this, but absolutely, I think internships are really critical in networking and joining these professional organizations so you can have a really good, strong idea of where you want to go.
Yeah, thanks. And I did want to just mention, I think if I didn't explicitly publish somebody was mentioning LinkedIn. I think if you want to follow up, if you could reach out to Alexis and she'll forward your contact information to me, and we'll use that as a conduit for follow-up if you want anything. For reasons related to my profession, I keep an extremely low online profile, and I connect to very few people online as a function of the part of the aspect of my job on a recurring basis. So you will see my LinkedIn profile out there, but it won't be very. I think I have like 2 or 3 contacts. But if you want to, please feel free to reach out to Alexis, and she'll forward your contact information over to me, and I'll reach out to you, and we can connect if you're interested in a follow-up at all. And or recommend to Alexis that maybe a follow-up conversation or a team meeting or mentorship or something. I do try to stay involved and support the community of Cal Poly alumni to the best of my ability. So again, thank you for everyone for participating. I really appreciate it. And thanks again. Have good luck in your telelearning. Teleworking is going okay for us. We have our challenges, so I understand. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much, JP. And so I know everyone's muted, but we're getting sort of a cascade of thank yous. As a final thing, I will be following up after this. So for the students out there and alum, please, take a look at your emails later today, and I'll have some follow-up for you. So, okay. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks again, JP. All right.
Sure.
And have a good rest of your day, everybody.
Have a good day. Thanks, everyone.
You too.
Thank you so much, JP.
Yeah, you're welcome, Alexis. Thanks again for setting this up.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for reaching out at the end of that meeting and just saying, I would love to talk about this, because I think it's such an important topic, and it's one that we definitely don't present on at the Career Center, but it's so critical, I think, especially when you know your industry, right? So if you're in engineering and you want to go into engineering in these different areas, it offers so much really great insight. So thank you. All right, I think.
Well, I'm glad you were able to present, because I think mine was definitely going to be crashing.
Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to share it. It's just a small hiccup, but I thought it went really well. So
No, it did. I agree.
I should stop the recording. But okay, so now I've stopped the recording. I'll be sure to share that with you. We'll put it on the College of Engineering YouTube page. And I'll give a post on LinkedIn. I'll tag you if that's okay. But, obviously, if you don't want me to, I can just put JP period and just stop it at that.
You can, I think if you're sending it directly to the students, my recommendation is you can say JP Kuntz Northrop Grumman, but put my Hotmail account.
Sure. I just mean on LinkedIn, how you can tag people.
Yeah, you can tag me.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, that's fine. I think online it just says, I was able to look today, it just says like manager engineering company. I didn't even explicitly ID Northrop Grumman. I think I'm willing to overcome that hump today and link myself to Northrop Grumman, and also Cal Poly. But I like I said, I've been pretty careful about keeping a really low profile. But I think those 2 I can make today.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, especially in your role, it makes a lot of sense to keep it more private. So, okay, well, I'll also be following up with you in an email later today too.
Okay.
So yeah, if we're going to put the recording online, there's a form that you.
Oh yeah, I probably have to fill out and send to you.
Right, yeah, and
Sure
there's
thing.
just a couple other things. So yeah, but thanks again. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope.
Great, no, thank you, Alexis. Really appreciate it. I'm glad this worked out.
Yeah, me too. Okay, goodbye.
Okay, bye.